Hello again. This is Foti, an Orthodox Christian with a USB mic. And this time I wanted to talk about the art of being offended and being offensive. And I'm going to discuss a somewhat recent event of the Olympics this year in Paris, specifically the opening ceremony performance. And that will be the micro, and then from there we'll get to the macro. So from small event, and we'll extrapolate it to a wider point. Okay, so I know it's been a few months since this was in a new cycle, but I think it's important to bring up again, or at least for me, because it's interesting for me. Now I recall when it happened that people, mostly I think a loud minority of people, uh, I think their religious right, were offended at the opening ceremony in the Paris Olympics. Now, for those that don't know, the opening ceremony featured a trans model and other trans performers, I believe, and and they weren't trans. I apologize. I didn't look into each person, but I think they're all definitely members of the LGBTQ community, or if not, they were doing a good job fitting in. Now, the controversy was that the performance, to many people, looked like it was referencing the Last Supper. And for those unaware, the Last Supper is a painting by Renaissance painter Leonardo da Vinci. So it's one of da Vinci's most famous works of art, and it's also a, a religious painting because it depicts the last meal, basically, of Jesus with his closest companions, the apostles. And this is prior to Judas, getting him arrested and crucified eventually, and setting everything in motion from there. So people were upset that these queer folk were making a mockery of the religion that often tells them that they're sinful and going to hell and stuff. Crazy, I know, but I don't want to be too sarcastic. But the interesting thing, though, is that it actually wasn't referencing the Last Supper. People were just assuming that. Now, I find this very interesting because, well, for one thing, the Last Supper, you know, made by an Italian painter. Da Vinci was an Italian painter. Doesn't really make sense why they would be referencing him in the opening ceremony in France, you know. But also, I think it's interesting because the Last Supper is one of those paintings that is not niche. It's not just like people that are really into fine art that are aware of it, or people that go to art school or something, or art historians or curators or work in museums and stuff. This is something that has entered pop culture, especially like something like the Mona Lisa. You know, so it's almost no longer arts. It's a commodity, right? Like we see the image everywhere. People think of like you know a portrait. They'll think of probably the Mona Lisa. That's like the first thing comes to mind. It's almost become like a trope, or like you know just something that like a symbol rather than a work of art. So part of that speaks to the commodification of art, where it's become more about being a product rather than a type of communication. and I could speak to a couple other things as well. Uh, yeah. So, and actually, I just learned this recently, and I say recently, I mean like a half hour ago, that the performance wasn't referencing the Last Supper. It was actually paying homage to Dionysus, the Greek god of like wine and theater and stuff. You know, so even though it's Greek god, I mean, you guys gotta keep in mind the Olympics it started in ancient Greece. So it's paying homage to basically like the most French of the Greek gods, pretty much. Like you're not gonna find a French guy that's gonna turn down wine, I guess. So Dionysus was very much a Frenchman before the French were even a culture. Anyway, so let's get to the next point. Like, what is offensive? What makes something offensive? Now, um, the fact that so many people interpreted the performance as being a reference, an homage, maybe irreverent or a blasphemy of the Last Supper, that could speak to many things. That could be the lack of, I guess, nuance maybe that people have. It could also speak to the failure of the creative director. That since so many people mistook their vision for the Last Supper and were offended, that maybe they didn't do the best job of conveying the idea of Dionysus. Or maybe people are just looking to get offended. So when I think of something being offensive, I think of it attacking someone that's a minority group, someone that's been disenfranchised, that's been, treated not well, generally by the society that they live in. So it's like punching down. It's harming people that are already getting hurt. It's like like racism. And in this case, since this is very relevant, it's like homophobia, it's like transphobia, things like that. It's a fear of the other. So to me, to be offended at a painting, which in my opinion is the rooted, of course, in a religious context and religious event, has become more like cultural and pop cultural at that. So to get offended at a painting being referenced, which as I said already, was not the intention, to be offended at that and not at the people that are part of the performance, which, as I said, those people, you know, pretty much anyone under the LGBTQ umbrella, especially trans people as of late, who are constantly, especially in America, being mistreated, being targets of hate crimes, being targets of laws that make it impossible for them to get the health care that they need. And that's not getting into some controversies around some of the athletes that were competing in the Olympics. I recall there was an Algerian boxer that not everybody, but many people were saying that she shouldn't even be boxing because there was this rumor that she was a trans woman when she was actually a cis woman. So she was born born female, signed female birth. She was a woman. She was not trans. So it's many people think they're being transphobic, but they're actually just being misogynistic, which is really awful. So it's just interesting to me again. And I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but to be offended over a painting rather than being offended over people that are you know suffering every day. Just stories every day of bad things happening in this to this community. Now I want to talk about something related also. So I'm not sure why so many Christians are so sensitive. As I said, when many of them are on the right politically and are offensive to marginalized groups, as I said, such as trans people. Now, the oldest image we have of Jesus is actually basically a graffiti, and if you, I'm not sure if you've seen it, so I'll describe it to you, and I'll probably put the image in the video. But it's got a picture of a crucified person with the head of a donkey on it, and it's not flattering, and it basically is making fun of a sound like a Greek kid or Greek guy, maybe guy's friend or classmate or someone who just didn't like him, saying so and so worships his god, and it's got a donkey head, and it's referencing Jesus, and also it's called the Alexamenos Graffito. I think that wasn't too bad for Latin, and yeah, so the earliest image we have of Jesus is one of him being mocked, and even uh, prior to that, the idea of the cross, the idea of crucifixion, you know, the cross now, every Christian pretty much has a cross, wears a cross. Some have a cross tattooed on them. It's like the biggest symbol of the faith. When people think of cross, they think Christianity. You know, it's it's ubiquitous. The cross initially, the connotation of the cross was crucifixion, and crucifixion is a very unpleasant, demeaning way to be executed. So when we have depictions of Christ on the cross as he's being crucified, you know, during his last moments, as you know, as a person before his resurrection, it's just interesting because we when I say we, it's not me, but like, oop, my alarm's going off. But we as like like the early Christians, like the body of the church, we we took these symbols, the cross, crucifixion, and we gave them a new context. We gave them a different meaning. In at least the Orthodox Church, we see the cross as life giving, which is basically contrary and like the opposite, pretty much, in meaning to what it initially stood for. So the symbols were co-opted and reclaimed, and now they're associated with Christianity. And I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. So I guess what I'm saying is, rather than be offended, at things that really shouldn't affect your life negatively. Like someone in another country doing a performance that may or may not be, referencing a painting that references an event that happened 2,000 years ago. Like Christians are not under attack in most of the world, especially in like the United States and Europe. Like this is not like and now you're just being I think sensitive, like overly sensitive. Whereas back in the day, in early Christianity, many Christians were willing to die, to be martyrs, witnesses for Christ, for their faith. And now we're crying about people doing theater, doing performance, people in makeup. I don't know. It just seems very, very strange to me. So I wish we were, which is funny, I think, considering some of the previous things I've said. But, you know, uh, you would think that we would be made of tougher stuff. Maybe Christians nowadays, we haven't suffered. We haven't seen what it's like, or we forget our history. We forget what many of our saints, many of our ancestors, forefathers went through, how they suffered for their faith, and we find things to get offended at. I guess maybe to feel like we're under a threat to. I don't know what it is. All I can say is it's not productive to be offensive, or sorry, it's not productive to be offended. It can be productive to be offensive. Actually, it can be provocative. It can get people talking. It can spread a message. It's like a form of protest. But being offended, that's like being a sucker. I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, I guess just let that simmer. Think about it. Try not to be so offended. There's so many things in the world that we can rightly be upset about. With income inequality, with especially in America, and this is a very contemporary issue right now. But with health insurance and things like that, I don't want to talk about. I don't want to talk about what happened to that health insurance CEO. That's a good, we can talk about that a lot. But there are things going on that are issues we should actually care about, not culture war nonsense. You know, so have thicker skin for things that aren't life or death to you. You know, and if you do see something that's an injustice or something that's actually hurting people, that's when I think you're right to be offended and you're right to do something. Anyway, I think I've said enough today. I don't want to go on and on, but uh, rather than be offended, try to be adaptive. Try to be, uh, you know, a little tougher. I think it's good to be strong, and when I say strong, I don't mean, you know, like like toxic masculinity strong. I mean, like strong-willed. Strong in your faith, strong in your values. Stand for something. Don't you know? Don't let the little things upset you, or don't like pretend. I think some people are like pretending that this is like a big deal. These types of things, like get the culture war nonsense out of your mind. There's people, millions without access to clean water. There's plenty of people that go to bed hungry. There's plenty of people that don't have any opportunity to, earn a living wage or to live comfortably. There's many people that are suffering the effects of, climate change, and many people that are living in war-torn countries that are actually, living much like the early Christians did, in fear of their, what may happen to them because of having their faith, what happen to their children, their churches, their communities. So have some perspective, and I hope I hope this video provided some. But I will say though, this Articuno deck is very offensive. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyways, good night. God bless. I love you all. Take care.